The kicking in now.
Good.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining tonight. We're super excited. Some of you may have seen my face a little bit before, but I'm Trent Jackson. I'm the fishing manager over at the Orvis Grand Rapids store in Michigan. And this is Nik. I'll let him introduce himself real quick before we get rolling.
Hi, everybody. Nik Garlock here. Really excited to be a part of this tonight. Store manager at the Orvis Grand Rapids store.
So I work for him. Oh,
yeah.
There you
go. The other way.
Nice. But we have a great night in store. We're really going to cover a lot around fall fly fishing, just a lot of the basics, a lot of the essential stuff for sure. But I thought it'd just give us, a couple minutes to share a little bit of our background. But really what we're going to cover tonight is just a little bit of a fall overview. We're going to talk about reading water, some hatches, gear and apparel. We're also going to talk about really some extra tips and tricks and hopefully answer a lot of your questions as well. Hey, B. Wilson from Erie, PA. Thanks for joining us. And New Zealand.
Yeah, that's nice. Awesome.
Awesome. That's sweet. So Nik and I have definitely both kind of shared the same fly fishing story in essence. We both grew up in the area here and fished the Midwest a ton. At one point or another, we both lived in Colorado. So we've had the opportunity to fish a lot out west. I've spent some time fly fishing down south, and Nik has covered the east. So we kind of got the four corners of the trout fishing world.
Definitely.
So hopefully we can drop a few little nuggets and some knowledge tonight. Nik, as far as your background with fly fishing, I know that you guided on the Muskegon, which is one of our local rivers here in Michigan, for almost 10 years, right? Whole decade?
Yeah, that's right.
So you've got to see a lot of the different seasons. And I can say confidently for myself, fall is my favorite time to fly fish. I don't know about yourself as well.
Definitely. I always get really excited for fall steelhead on the Muskegon River. It's almost like Christmas morning when it starts.
Nice. We'll talk briefly about that at some point today for sure. From a fall overview perspective, here in Michigan, we do have the opportunity in the Midwest to fish for a huge variety of species. We're really going to kind of tailor tonight's talk around trout fishing specifically. But what fish, throughout this season can we target potentially?
So I mean, during the fall, trout fishing definitely takes, kind of a forefront when we look at brown trout, some brook trout and rainbow trout, but specifically brown trout and brook trout, because they are fall spawners. So obviously the regulations play a part of that. Some streams will close during that time, but they get a pretty big appetite, kind of the pre-spawn time, as well as some other like warm water species like pike, muskie, some bass as well. So that those all can be just a riot in the fall.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah, and for all of you viewing, I'm sure that you have a variety of different trout in your region. It could be those cutthroats. A lot of people have rainbows and browns. We're lucky enough to have some brook trout hanging around here too. Some gorgeous fall colors, absolutely phenomenal. What would you say separates fall fly fishing, the season of it, differently than the rest of the year? We'll go in kind of more depth with the tactics, but what kind of changes do we start to notice?
Well, I think, especially here in Michigan, we have the change of the season, the change in the weather. I mean, gosh, this week alone, we were almost 80 degrees on Monday. And I think tomorrow we'll have a high of maybe 50. So we've got a big change. We're going to have, we're already seeing the leaves change color. Just those really high level observations, that's a big change. I definitely look forward to just reaching in my closet and bringing down my flannel shirts and putting away like all my short sleeves. Like that's pretty exciting for me. So just those little high level observations. But in the water, in our streams locally, the water tends to be a little bit lower in the fall. But we have salmon around here, and they're kind of working their way, through their cycle, and, spawning and then dying, but then that's bringing on, the next phase of bringing in steelhead and having some other species that are coming around as well. So we constantly, I feel like the fall is like definitely just an ongoing like stages of change, that just rolls one after the other after the other. It's a very exciting time.
Yeah, for all of you tuning into, whether you're kind of a beginner angler or intermediate or advanced, you can probably all notice that for the most part in the fall, water conditions, usually we have lower water conditions until things pick up a little bit right now. But I know here in Michigan, throughout most of the Midwest and a lot of other states, the water is kind of a little bit lower, a little bit more clear. Obviously, we get a lot more cloud cover for sure. So the way that we're going to actually target trout drastically changes because of that weather. And we will dive a little bit more into that in a second when we start talking about reading the water, but just kind of giving you a context of what we're looking at with that for sure. So differences in tactics. So you mentioned, a lot of trout and other species of fish in the fall are spawning, right?
Yeah.
So what does that do for us as an angler? Our approach on that, maybe just some good rules to go by, and then how do our tactics kind of go along with that?
So, looking at that pre-spawn phase, the trout tend to get, they're packing on lots of, they're trying to prepare for one, spawning, two, the winter months. Here in Michigan, we actually have winter where maybe not all of our viewers have as much winter as we do, but they're trying to put calories down, so their appetites definitely accelerate, as fall comes through, and so they become a lot more aggressive, and that's where, and we'll talk about this a little later on some different actual tactics to fish for them, but one thing that comes to mind is like a streamer fishing can be really, really productive in the fall, because we are looking for those very aggressive fish that are feeding, packing on pounds, and getting ready for that spawn and wintering over as well. So
I think most of us are all in that phase, the chili and all the soups and all that stuff bust out. You get nice and cozy, comfortable on the couch and wait it out, start tying flies for sure. So
yeah, you got
I can relate to those fish.
I think it goes across the board.
Yeah. With that aggressiveness, we talked about the streamer bite. What would you say from, like nymphing or even dry fly fishing? How does that kind of tailor? What differences do we notice between like spring and summer versus when we slide into fall? What do fish do as far as that goes?
Well, it's a great question, Trent. And really, when you look at it from the fall, our temperatures are decreasing. And then in the spring, they're increasing. So looking at a fish's metabolism, it's starting to slow down towards once it gets colder. So, after that there's that initial, like they're very aggressive, then they start to slow down. But then bringing in spring and warmer temperatures, it starts to accelerate, and it kind of repeats itself where they're coming out of winter and they get, a little bit more aggressive. They're, coming out of being, in a kind of doldrum state all winter long. So I think in the fall, that is a really important part of that. Just observing that change through the cycle.
Yeah. I think spring, when it comes to trout fishing, is kind of like the land of plenty. there's tons of different bugs that are hatching. There's a lot of other, potentially spring spawning going on, but there's a lot more food sources where kind of that said that the opposite end of that is in the fall, all of that kind of slows down too, just like their metabolism. So from that aggression standpoint, at least what we've experienced fishing together quite a bit, is that you'll find that a lot of those fall trout will be more aggressive to what they can get at that time period for sure.
Yeah. And just
dry flies and streamers.
Yeah. Circling back on, different tactics, especially in like the northern part of the country, dry fly fishing definitely slows down because of the amount of activity in the water. We're not seeing as much insect activity, bugs hatching, that kind of thing. You may have a few western streams that experience some continued dry fly fishing through the winter, but generally the northern months, it slows down. We're looking at nymphing and streamer fishing as kind of being our mainstays, with dry fly fishing pretty much coming to a complete stop in this area. But it does have some opportunities, I would say, out west and maybe some of the Spring Creek regions as well.
Yeah. And a little bit later, I know we're going to chat about some hatches that are still going on in depth a little bit for sure. Where's a good place? Obviously we're here in the Midwest. What's a great place for folks to go find updated fishing conditions? What is kind of happening in their local regions?
Well, a great place would be the Orvis fishing reports on the Orvis.com website. Also, your local Orvis store. That's your best place to find really in-depth and localized fishing reports. Talk to the professionals. They're on the water. Trent's out on the water. Gosh, he's out more than I am. So it's just good for him. He should be out doing that. But those are the people that you really want to talk to. They have all the information, and they're connected to the local community as well to get other information. Yeah,
absolutely. So I will, we're going to discuss a lot, but I'd highly encourage you to kind of seek those resources out, because it's always best to, if you're fishing local, you're going to get the most up-to-date information for someone fishing that area. Now, Nick and I would love for you to reach out to us with comments, questions, all that stuff tonight for sure. And we'll do our best to answer all of those as we kind of move along in that comment section, or after this, shoot us a message through our Instagram or the store, whatever, give us a shout. But
yeah, it looks like we have the link to the fishing report section in the comments as well, if you haven't seen that yet.
Oh, nice. Sweet. Let's dive into reading water right now. So in the fall, again, fall water conditions can vary drastically. We're here in the Midwest. You're going to have different stuff out west, out east, down south. But on average, lower, clear water, fish can get a little bit more finicky. They've seen a lot of flies through the spring, a lot of flies through the summer. Where would we start when we walk out on the water? What are the things that you would look for in the fall, like location wise?
I definitely like to look for, either runs, pools. The riffles I tend to not focus on as much because that is a faster water. And because they're starting to slow down, they still have a high metabolism, but they're packing on pounds. They're looking for something that they don't have to work as hard in. So, a pool, a little bit slower water can really be a great place to start looking for fish in the river. When it comes to lakes, I would say that definitely looking at some of those edges, drop offs, transition places where they can find an easy meal, that they're not going to have to work so hard. Being in shallow water, they're going to become prey. Looking for places that is it's going to congregate bait, that kind of thing. But definitely in a river, it's much easier to find some of those like pools and runs. That's gonna have your best chance at finding fish.
Yeah. So probably for streamers and nymphing for the most part, and then working some of the river banks as well, right? You got to get those undercut banks, and that's pretty much universal. Most rivers are going to have some sort of undercut, or they're going to have overhanging grass that you can kind of target fish there as well. For sure.
Definitely.
One thing I'd say, we might talk about now. For me in the fall, a lot of people are out hunting, doing a bunch of other stuff. When it comes to fly fishing for me in the fall, that's the mindset I take. Every time I go out on the water, you never know if that fish is going to be right on the edge of that riverbank waiting for a bug to drop in, or waiting to slide out and ambush. So I'm creepy crawling along the best that I can. Because again, lower water conditions, it's a little bit more, challenging to not spook those fish. So I'm going to take all my time and effort to really just slow it down and pick that water apart for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
You like the creepy crawler comment there?
Creepy crawler, yeah, that sounds like a great tactic.
Hey, those pro waders
Got to
without
be
knee pads in
stealthy.
there though, clutch.
That's right. That is
Yeah.
right.
One thing that we had a question about earlier that had got sent to us before we started actually was, as far as navigating like water temperature changes in the river, does that have an effect on where fish would sit? Like maybe where a creek comes in into a river system, or maybe a natural spring?
Yeah, it definitely does. Having colder water, I would say if you have a warmer stream and then you have some cold, consistent like a spring, definitely you're going to find some fish that will like to hang around that. Sometimes that water is cleaner. If you've had like a high water event or a bunch of rain where it's made the water dirty, but then you have some nice clean water that's coming in from the ground, possibly. You may find some more fish that like to hang around that. Maybe if there's some debris and stuff coming down in the mainstream, they might find some of that cleaner water a little bit. It's going to be a little bit easier for them to live without having a bunch of dirt and leaves running through their gills all the whole time.
Right on.
Yeah.
So as we're talking about reading water, a term that comes up a lot is foam is home. Would you like to kind of discuss what that means? I know we have
it's
quite a
great.
variety of anglers on this call, so I think that might be something cool to talk about here for a second.
Yeah, besides your favorite tasty beverage, really what that looks like is, when you're approaching on a river, I've always kind of, used that that saying as, this is where all of the food in the river tends to travel. Everything gets pushed there by wind, current. So when you're looking at a stream and you find a current, faster water, you're going to see what looks like foam. It might be heavy foam. It might be just little specks of it, but you can definitely, determine that, that there is a difference in the main current versus like that, what we call a current seam or a run. And that is, I always think about it as like, that's the buffet line. It's like Old Country Buffet. I don't know if that's copyrighted, but that's they're not sponsoring this one, by the way. But that's where all the food is going to be, and generally that's where you're going to find the fish. If the food's there, the fish are going to be there too. So it's a great place to find fish.
For you viewers there, if you can't tell, we love fly fishing, we love beer, and we love food. So all of those will continually get brought up tonight at some point or another for sure. One thing, as you start out, you're trying to figure out how my flies are drifting. A great way to figure that out, as far as whether it's a dry fly or it's nymphs underneath an indicator, we use that foam pretty heavily as a great kind of gauge of speed, right? You make your cast out there. Maybe you have an indicator with some nymphs underneath it. If that can kind of maintain that same speed as the foam, underneath the water, it's doing the same thing. So it kind of creates a lot more realism to fish. So that's a great tip if you're just trying to get that figured out. Hey, am I at the right depth? Am I at the right speed? That's a great place to start for sure.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I was going to reference, I actually just watched this video the other day. Tom does a great one. If you want to kind of see like a nice overlay and some videos on where to find trout in rivers, he has done a couple awesome ones through the Orvis Resource Learning Center. And I think it's on the New Fly Fisher as well too. So there'll probably be a link for that one. So after we get done with this, if you want to learn a little bit more on kind of that water structure and what you're looking for when you're reading water, that's a great video to walk through as a follow-up for sure. So
yeah, it looks like they might have dropped that right in the comments there, the link to that.
Perfect.
Awesome. On the spot.
So do you want to dive into, I said hatches, but realistically, we're kind of talking about food sources. So maybe let's start with kind of some larger, I think the term you like to use a lot of times is our super hatches. We'll start with some of the bigger hatches that happen.
Yeah.
The throwback,
hatches. Huh? Okay. Yeah, that's going back to probably the 70s and 80s. But Looking at major hatches, in the fall, this can be very regional, and depending on how warm, water temp, air temp, that kind of thing. But the general hatches that you'll potentially find in the fall, maybe blue wing olives, maybe caddis. Some of these fall caddis hatches can actually be quite prolific. So definitely something to note. Trichos can occur. That is a very small insect, about a size 20, 22. And then we also have some stoneflies in the fall as well. And then there are some terrestrials, depending on what fall is in your area. Fall can be, fall here, and it can start in September, whereas out west, that's some of the best fishing and it can still be quite warm. So it can be quite different. Some of the best terrestrial fishing out west is in September and October. And then, of course, midges, you're going to find those year round, but generally can provide some really good fishing in the winter time and fall. In some of the western tailwaters, and some of the eastern, but a lot of the western tailwaters have some really, really nice midge fishing on a really cold winter day. So definitely gives it some really good opportunities. That's kind of a high level. I would say those are the main hatches that you would look for in the fall.
We got a couple of great questions here. We can kind of talk about the timing of when some of those hatches occur. But Ty Guy asked, do you guys fish the same spots during hatching season or move around?
Well, without giving away too many secrets with spots, especially
That's what the people are here for.
Right. Oh, I was going to just give them all your special spots.
We'll drop the GPS coordinates in the comment section.
That's exactly what we're looking for. During hatching season, as you learn a section of water, whether it's a lake or a river, a lot of times those sections or that spot is going to produce year over year. And, noting that, to go back to it the next year. There's a reason why it happens there, and it's usually because it's favorable conditions, whether it's, the composition of the bottom, it's the right gravel, structure, all of those things play a part in that. And, when you have all these different variables together, that's going to provide for a really good, environment for good hatches. But if there is a major shift in all of that, the environment, a great example is, maybe a drought where, a river was allowed to be at a low level for a long period. The section that you normally fish, that could change. So definitely, our environment, as we all know, is constantly changing. But on the average, I would say that it definitely, if you go back to the same section or same spot every year, it's probably going to be pretty much the same, without any outside, influence.
Yeah. And I would add to that from a tactic standpoint in the fall, because you have fewer hatches potentially going on. A lot of times we like to cover more water, where in the spring or early summer, when you have some more prolific hatches, we have a lot of bugs going. This is kind of a time where we call prospecting for trout. So we might go to hey, this is one of our favorite spots. We're going to go try to fish that. All right, no fish are rising, or we make some casts, nothing happens. Let's move on. We can revisit that later on for sure. And that kind of comes down to timing too, which is one of the things I wanted to bring up. A lot of these flies that we talk about, most of them are going to happen kind of midday this time of year, like that peak heat of the day, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, with evening or, nighttime temperatures being, we're probably in the 30s now in Michigan. When it gets that cold, a lot of things slow way down. So the height of the day, I would say that 1 to 3 p.m. Time period, that's where you're going to see most of your insect activity. It's the warmest part of the day. Yeah, definitely.
Right on. Sweet. hope that helps, Ty. Yeah, we have a couple other questions here, but we'll kind of walk through some other. We'll talk about some nymphs, kind of fishing underneath the water. We'll talk about some streamers, and then we'll kind of follow up, or maybe we'll answer some of those questions. We've had a couple about different streamers that we recommend, and then even for like our Great Lakes area.
Great Lakes, yeah.
One thing I would say with the dry fly fishing this time of year is you will have fish be a lot more finicky and picky about the stage that fly is in. You know, it could be that emerger that's kind of coming up out of the water, or it could be that true dry fly sitting on top. And so, especially out west, I find that, you know, you might think you're seeing fish eat right on the surface, but actually they're eating an emerger and then they're coming up after they've kind of almost already eaten it and gone back down. So having a variety of sizes and life stages in the fall, I think is very essential to have a pretty good array of dry flies in your box at this time still in the life stages.
Absolutely. And I think on highly pressured water, that becomes even more important to make sure you have various life stages of those different insects. You know, that they have probably seen, you know, on certain rivers, for example, the Henry's Fork in Idaho, they've probably seen a few flies this year. So, you know, having something that that's going to trick them is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll kind of talk about, I want to bring up leaders and tippet and stuff, but we'll save that for the gear section. We can kind of apply that to some standard practices for dry fly fishing with that.
Yeah, sounds good.
So other food sources besides dry flies, we said, you know, that's only kind of a small amount of the fall fly fishing realm. So from a nymph standpoint, if we want to go fish either underneath an indicator or maybe Euro nymphing, you know, what are the main bugs that we'll typically use that work most situations, I would say, regardless?
Well, you know, I'll back up a little bit, you know, as a easy way for an angler when they come to a stream to kind of figure out like what is it that I should be fishing is, you know, maybe if you have an opportunity to turn over some rocks and look at what insects are actually underneath those rocks or on the bottom. Chances are in the fall and winter you're going to find some big stone flies, things like that. So that's a great place to just start and, you know, figure out, hey, this is what I probably should be fishing with, because I know these are floating down the stream. They're crawling around on rocks. So definitely those fish are going to be keyed in on them. So that's definitely a good way to start. But then looking at, you know, maybe some other insects like hellgrammites, some, what did you call it? Creepy crawlies.
Creepy crawlies?
That
you don't
was,
remember that little set? Yeah.
Yeah, creepy crawlies. You know, stuff that's big and ugly, that kind of thing. But also looking at any bait fish too. That you know, we can kind of delve into some different bait fish that are available. Crayfish can be a possibility, and all these things you actually see just by observation. Looking in the water when you're, you know, walking in. You know, looking at maybe even some smaller trout or sculpins, leeches. And right now, like we have this, our salmon are spawning. So there's about a gazillion eggs floating in the river. So that's a major food source for our fish right now. They definitely love to eat those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say as far as selecting a fly out of your box, you know, you don't need to know the exact scientific term of the fly that you flip the rock over with, right? Size, shape, and color. If you can get those three things down, you're
Absolutely.
99% of the way there. So,
Yep.
you know, you can make it as complicated as you want, which at times is super fun, but you can make it as simple as that. And realistically, that works pretty well all the time. So don't get buckled down or bogged down by, I don't have absolutely every single fly. Kind of get those three together and you'll be off to a good start for sure. So
yeah, definitely.
Streamers. Let's dive into some of those bait fish type things that we just talked about. So one of the questions that we had was a little bit further up. Besides like woolly buggers, you know, what are some other kind of staple streamer patterns that we use that really you could use pretty much anywhere in the U.S.? Oh yeah, there it is. Besides woolly bugger, What other streamers are there? So
I like to use a lot of rabbit, and some of the specific patterns out there, just a basic zonker, conehead zonker. Those could be really, really productive. They're very easy. If you tie your own flies, they're a pretty easy pattern to tie. Also, your local shop will have those as well. Some of the marabou streamers, there's some tandem stuff out there that works really well. Um, you know, it doesn't always have to be, there's definitely the trend of fishing really big streamers. But, think about, some of the flies, some of the water that you're fishing, that may not be always the case. And I, tend to start small and then kind of work up into a bigger pattern. Um, you know, I would say like, I'm trying to think of, some of Kelly Gallup's patterns are really good. The Zoo Cougar is a great pattern to have in your box. Uh, uh, the
Mini
double
Viking midges, yeah, the
Viking
double Ganga,
midges,
baby Ganga.
yep, yep. Baby Ganga is a really nice. Gosh, there's hundreds of them out there. But I like to have stuff that's got action, that moves, that doesn't require a lot of movement on my part, that will move just in the current. And we'll talk about, a little bit probably about just, some of the tactics on using these. But, I like to have something that kind of moves on its own. Color is I don't know if it can be important sometimes. I think some of it is, depending on the water that you're at. But, I like to kind of narrow it down to black, olive, white, yellow, maybe throw in like a chartreuse in there. But generally keeping it, those basic colors, that if you looked in my streamer box, that's kind of how I have it divided right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like in a lot of the classes we talk about this a little bit is we kind of look at the season sometimes as far as what to match our flies with. So in the fall, you have all those autumnal colors with all the different leaf changes. Again, kind of sticking that brown and dark olive, kind of those golden yellows seem to work pretty well wherever you go for sure. So
Yeah.
that's a good little rule of thumb. We did have some questions about Great Lakes tributaries for the season. What would we suggest for those ones? And we don't necessarily need to kind of deep dive into that one, but we can touch on it for sure.
Yeah, so definitely with Great Lakes tributaries, depending on what you're targeting, egg patterns for steelhead, salmon, and trout would all be good options. If you're looking at any warm water species, pike, muskie, bass, those fish are very hungry this time of year. So using some big bait fish patterns in various colors would be really good options. But I definitely, when it comes to steelhead and trout, I like to, steelhead and trout, looking at egg flies first, stone flies. And then, of course, if you're into any streamer fishing, looking at, some, I guess there's probably two schools of thought. One of using more realistic, sculpin patterns, and then also using something that's more of an attractor, something that's bright or just, lots of movement and color, whether it's purple, pink, orange, black. So there's those two schools of thought. You can't really go wrong. But try both and see what works best.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I did want to circle back on was we talked about dry flies a little bit. Just one other thing we didn't really touch on is there are a lot of states that will still have some hoppers going on depending on the weather, some terrestrial style patterns, as well as a lot of beetles or ants. So those might be potentially, just this afternoon, even here, we had a huge hatch of all these flying ants that came through our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Man, I wish I was on the river right now. Probably crazy.
Yeah.
So
so that'll be the same thing.
A big thing for those of you wanting to try your hand at dry fly fishing this time of year is work those stream edges, because a lot of those beetles or grasshoppers, all those are kind of hanging on the grass edges or up in the trees, and they fall down. So those fish kind of just sit right on the edge where those, we talk about foam is home. A lot of times they'll get jammed up against the edge too. So from a tactic standpoint, you can really obviously cast that out there and let it drift. But this time of year with the aggression of trout, a lot of times we'll actually kind of use the rod tip and twitch that fly a little bit along the edge to give it a little action. A challenging thing in the fall is a lot of areas will have either leaves or some sort of other plant life that has died and fallen in the river. So to kind of separate that bug from the leaves or debris can kind of help those trout dial in on this. Hey, this is a food source. So,
yeah, no, that's a great point. And I just thought of a little tip. I was actually fishing with some friends this past week, and all the leaves have started to fall and they're in the water. And I noticed that when they were bringing we were indicator fishing, and they were bringing their rigs back in, and they were dragging it along the surface, and every single cast they would bring in all these leaves. And I said, hey, let your stuff sink and then bring it kind of under the water, under the surface film. And they stopped getting as many leaves and they weren't collecting. And I was like, oh yeah, see, that does work. So try that while you're out there next time. It'll make a big difference in how much time you're just taking off leaves and weeds on your hook.
Great solutions come out of great frustration, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Right. Let's jump into some gear and apparel. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about probably the most essential thing when we're going out on the river is what fly rod would we suggest overall? We have varying levels, different people, different areas. If you had to pick one rod that's going to help you do most of them pretty well, what would you suggest to people?
Hands down would have to be that 9'5" weight. That's a great place to start. That's going to handle fish, give or take, up to about 7 pounds. So you can bass fish with it. You can trout fish with it. You can do a lot with it. And that's one that you can, travel with, and, you can be prepared for a lot of different situations. So that's a really good place to start.
All right. If folks wanted to be a little bit more specific on streamer fishing, what maybe one model style would you think might be? And obviously that varies where they're at, but if you had to pick a little bit heavier rod for streamer fishing to make things a little bit easier, what would you suggest?
I definitely would probably look at like a 6 or a 7 weight. Still looking at a 9-foot rod, but that 6 or 7. Generally, I fish a sinking line when I'm streamer fishing. So having something that's got a little bit more backbone to it will really help deliver your fly. And also, this time of year, you're looking for bigger fish. And so, having something that's going to help deliver the fly and help you land it in a short amount of time, it's really important. So a 6 or a 7 weight would definitely be a great option.
Yeah. I know for me, as I've traveled out west in the fall, well, really anytime, but especially in the fall, you get those high winds coming through the mountains.
Yeah.
And even for dry fly fishing, sometimes it's nice to have like a 6 weight or a faster kind of action on a 5 weight rod like that, the D version of the H3. That helps punch that fly through the wind, because it's so frustrating when you're like, all right, if I can just cast 4 feet further without the wind blowing it right back in my face, I
absolutely
can make it or break it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Been there enough times.
We had one question around the rods as far as fast action versus mid action. I don't know if you want to briefly touch on that or if you want me to kind of talk about it real quick. But
it's really a hard. There's no real solid answer to that. I would recommend that what works best for you. Me personally, I have both, and the reason I have both, generally I am a more aggressive caster, so I have a little bit more faster rods. However, there are a couple rivers that are a little bit smaller in Michigan that I like to fish. That I like to fish a little bit like a more of a mid action, a little bit softer rod, I get a little bit more flex out of it when I'm short casting. I don't need as much room to get the rod going. So I like to have a little bit more flex. It's generally when I'm roll casting a little bit more. I just find that a rod that's got a little bit more flex to it performs a little bit better for me. But, really it all depends on the individual. I don't feel like it's quite fair for me to tell you, oh, you should have a fast action rod when maybe that's not the one for you. So, it's really best to consult a professional, go into your local store and have them, help you with that, cast some rods, and see what works really best for you.
I remember probably one of the first times you and I went on a float. You probably know where I'm going with this. I feel really confident. I like a little bit slower rod. That's what I like to fish. And we both had the same weight rod. And you're like, hey, just use mine. You're gonna have to rig yours up. We spent the first 2 hours with me struggling to cast that rod because I just need to slow down. And it's one of those things, and unless you go and try one out, you're not going to know. So I love when people come in the shop and like, hey, can we test these two out? We want to know the difference. Like, okay, great. Let's go outside for 5 minutes and we'll kind of figure it out together. Because at the end of the day, it's like what works best for you is obviously best for you, not for me.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Yeah. Briefly, let's just kind of talk about reels on most of them. What are maybe 2 or 3 things that you're looking for in a reel for most any setup, really, honestly?
Yeah, I like a large arbor reel. So larger diameter, it's going to be faster pickup, especially if you're fishing for species that are, were designed to destroy all of your equipment. You want something that, is got made of bar stock aluminum, and that it also has a sealed disc drag. Those are probably the 3 things that I look for in a reel.
Yeah. Right on. And then overall line choice. I know that can vary so much because we talked about so much different stuff.
For sure. But, I definitely look at, what my method of fishing is. So whether it's, streamer fishing, my first choice right now is the depth charge, in a 250 grain or a 300 grain. That's a great line for streamer fishing. It's a 30-foot sinking head. That's great. Like that works really, really well for me. As far as nymphing goes, if we're looking at either trout fishing or the doing some steelhead fishing, if we're nymphing, then the Anadro line from Scientific Anglers is a great line, or some of the nymph trout lines. Yeah, Pro Trout nymph line is really awesome as well. So those are all solid options, and you can get even more specific, but those right now, those are what I have rigged up, ready to go.
I'm just going to respond to a couple of these questions before we move on. That's great. Couple questions about just different, again, kind of fishing conditions, what's happening in different regions. Nik and I kind of talked about in the beginning is, I know I saw a couple different ones for the Midwest. One was for New York. We have a lot of great fishing reports, again, that you can kind of look into. My best guess for if you're looking at New York, one of my buddies over at the Rochester Orvis store, I know would love for you to give him a shout tomorrow, and you can talk to him for a long time about all the conditions. And from what I'm aware of, the fishing's pretty good there right now for sure. So, but he will talk to you up about it. So give him a shout. One thing that I like that we kind of came up with too that I want to mention is if you're kind of trying to figure out maybe what rod works best for your scenario and kind of get a better ballpark, Orvis actually has this thing called the fly rod selector. And so you can go on to the site, you can basically click through like, hey, these are the types of fish I'm fishing for. This is where I live. This is what I like to do. Like, is it dry fly, nymphing, streamer fishing? And literally it'll just walk through 7 or 8 different steps, and it gives you some great recommendations. So I would say that's an awesome route that's going to help dial you in on that for sure. So
definitely.
And it worked out perfect that our next question was about leaders and tippet, lengths, weights, etc., because that's next on my little talking board here. So, thank you, Steve, for queuing us up on that one. I appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's talk about leaders for dry fly fishing first, just kind of some, we're going to paint some broad strokes with that depending on where we're
Right.
at. Then we'll talk about some stuff for nymphing and streamer fishing, and maybe we can just briefly bring up, what's the difference between like our Mirage fluorocarbon or the super strong nylon, just so, maybe folks aren't familiar with that. We can kind of just break it down for them real quick.
Yeah, definitely. Keeping it really simple, I generally will like a nylon leader for dry fly fishing. It's a little bit lighter. It floats a little bit better. Our super strong leaders work really good for that. In a 9-foot basic length is great. If you have some finickier fish, then adding some tippet to that, making it a bit longer. We do carry a 12-foot leader as well. I found myself on some of our bigger tailwaters, some fish required a little bit more encouragement with a longer leader. Some of micro currents, that kind of thing. So giving myself a little bit leg up, having a little bit longer leader helps. When it comes to nymphing, I generally will use a fluorocarbon leader. It tends to sink better. It's a little bit harder material. I also use that for, my saltwater pursuits as well. It's a harder, stronger material. Steelhead, salmon, same. We'll go with Mirage as well. Fluorocarbon, it's a harder material. It also basically disappears in the water, which is crucial. We'll also find, I've learned to love some fluorocarbon for some very small dry flies because it kind of sits in the film. It doesn't quite sink in, like a 6X or 7X size. It kind of sits quite nice on the surface. So I'll use that with some very, very small, as we talked about, midges and like tricos, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a nice option as well.
One other question, just bring up, and you can probably just message us or give me a shout at the store tomorrow if you want to deep dive more into it, because it's steelhead related. It's just basic go-to rod outfit for steelhead fishing, and that can be so varied, or I would say large trout. For us, I'd say a 10-foot 7-weight. We really like that rod if you're nymphing, because it gives you a lot of sensitivity, but a lot of pull. Here in the Midwest, we definitely have a lot of down structure, like log jams, that fish, as soon as you hook them, that's right where they're going. So to have something that's still sensitive for nymphing, but has that pull power is great. From, a streamer perspective, maybe a 9-foot 8-weight would be a little bit more ideal. It's a little bit shorter, like Nick talked about. And then one of our favorite things, we could literally be on this call for another 4 days talking about swinging for steelhead. Our favorite rod is probably like the 11-foot 8-weight mission rod. It is phenomenal. Yeah, I know that Sean Combs is going to talk about that probably pretty in depth later on this month, and we'll kind of brief you on some other Orvis live things. So that would be my 30-second answer and not my 4-day response. But feel free to give us a shout tomorrow about that one. Let's dive into, all right, we got our gear. We already talked about some flies. What about fall apparel, right? What are we going to,
super important. That's, any time spent out, in the outdoors, especially in your northern states, it can go from a nice 60-degree day and it could start snowing in the afternoon and be in the 30s. So, layering is super important for that. It could literally save your life. Having a system, that I've got mine down to, a base layer, for really cold temperatures, I look at, a next to skin type of layer. And then the pro underwater pants. I pretty much live in those all. I've got them, pretty much from now through spring. Those are going to stay, ready to go. I wear them every time I'm out. That's a great option. They're super comfortable. We have two versions of those pro underwater pants. I've definitely really enjoyed the lighter version, for when it, those warmer times during the day, I could still have them on and be comfortable. But then, having a next to skin layer on the top and, the Pro Fleece, really solid combination that's going to keep you warm and keep you comfortable, which, inevitably is going to keep you fishing longer. Then looking at waders, we've got lots of options for that. But, keeping, yourself comfortable and warm, the new boot foots, the Pro boot foots, I mean, what else could you say? They're amazing. Those are going to keep you out there comfortable, when it's colder. But, the boot foots, the stocking foot waders with some great boots are a great option. Just having breathable waders, as long as you are, dressing appropriately underneath, that's going to really, go well for you. And of course, great gloves, hat, those kind of things. And then having some great rain gear, as a great shell, that's going to be huge. Just even if it's just to block the winds, we could go on and on and on about, cold weather dressing. That could probably be an entire another presentation. But those are kind of some basics that I definitely go to every time.
I'd say, out of all of them, say the waders, but clothing, having a rain jacket is key. And it's not just, fall definitely has its rainy time periods, but as a windbreak too. There's nothing worse than being out on the water and getting chilly. Guessing you want me to bring it up, but, like a heavier puffy jacket or something, I absolutely love Pro insulated jackets, whether we have the LT version now, the lighter version, kind of that mid-weight, and then the HD is absolutely phenomenal at this point. And then last but not least, probably one of the things that if I forget it at the truck, I'm definitely walking back to go grab them. Doug just had a question about glasses, what color lenses for stream fishing for trout. The glasses thing is huge for me, for sure. I would say, your best overall color to choose when fishing for trout, because we're kind of talking more about rivers here, would be some sort of like amber copper lens, because a lot of times when you're fishing, you want to match the lens that you're wearing to the water that you're viewing. Maybe you're out in big open water, you might want like a blue or a gray lens to kind of cut that glare. But an amber lens is going to be phenomenal. Nick and I both wear the Smith sunglasses with a chroma pop in it. It has a sweet lens and it has sweet polarization. So when you're going to try to sight fish for trout in the fall, whether that's dry fly fishing or trying to sneak up on them to pitch a streamer through like a little bucket run or something like that, it makes it so much easier to see those fish when you have those two things in combination. So great question, Doug.
Yeah, no, it's super important.
Mm-hmm. We're getting kind of close. So I just want to save the next couple minutes for a couple just additional little pro tips, little tricks, little tactics, things that people kind of get hung up on that I think would be super beneficial for whether it's, you're a beginner angler out there or you're kind of getting a little bit more advanced as well. I think a couple of these will help you out. So I don't know if there's any ones that stand out to you that you would mention about fall fly fishing. I know I have one or two. I think I already mentioned about kind of try to be a little bit more stealthy in the fall and taking your time for sure. I think this is something that you and I discussed quite a bit, is picking your days. Why would I go choose in the fall to go fly fish on one specific day? Some of us are very limited by time. I'm definitely grateful that I can get out on the water. We have some local water that's only 5 minutes from me that I can fish all the time. But, some people, hey, I only have one day a week I can go, or maybe it's once a month. So why would I choose one over another? You have some rhyme and reason for that in the fall or even early going into winter, I guess.
Ooh, one river over another.
No, one day.
Oh, one day. Yeah, sorry. So I think that, barometric pressure, and I want to keep this high level, but, an incoming storm, weather front, that can play a big part in how a fish behaves. And as we get further into winter, that can play a bigger part even more. Looking at, those swings and barometric pressure, that fish tend to get a little bit uncomfortable when there's a dramatic swing, and letting them kind of settle down. Sometimes, that goes out the window, but generally, like if it's a huge swing, I may wait for it to settle a little bit. Once the storm comes through, let it kind of settle down and then go out. Just because sometimes it can really just put that bite off where it's just like nothing happens, and you're like, I don't understand. Like, we know this is a good stream, and there's just nothing going on, and you've got like a big, either a snowstorm or a big, rainstorm, something like that coming in, can make things a little bit wonky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The kind of to elaborate on that, fish have basically kind of like a swim bladder inside of them, kind of like a balloon, right? And so as a storm or something up front is kind of pushing in, initially that pressure kind of drops. They feel really comfortable. So like streamer fishing during those time periods, like right before it starts raining, right as it starts, those fish are moving around. They'll eat quite a bit. Then like Nik described, is now it's raining, it's really heavy, it's a little tougher. Sometimes streamer fishing can be great right after the rain, because now instead of low clear conditions, it's all kind of muddied up. Those kind of predatorial trout, bigger brown trout,
Right.
rainbow, whatever it is, now they're out on the hunt, because all those smaller fish kind of get dislodged from their places. And then, it is challenging for a day or two after some of that, because that pressure kind of balances out. It's almost like those fish have got like a stomach ache or something. That bladder has all that extra pressure on it. And they're like, we're just going to chill for a little bit until we get comfortable, find a different location or something like that. So.
And I will say that, a lot of people get discouraged by, maybe a heavy rain and the water gets really dirty. And a lot of times people are used to a very clear, river, whatever, body of water. Don't be discouraged by, dirty water. A lot of it may just be that you need to just change your tactics. I've caught some amazing fish in water that I was like, not too sure that they were able to see, 4 inches down below, but somehow they found my fly, and I was like, wow, I can't believe that fish found this. It's like totally dirty. We almost bailed on the entire trip and just decided to go, and they were actually able to connect with that fly. So definitely don't bail on it. Just change your tactics, maybe change color of your presentation, change the fly color, change your presentation. Maybe you have to fish a little bit deeper, that kind of thing.
And that's actually kind of one of the questions we got is, do you recommend to have multiple reels set up, ready to go with different lines, sinking, floating, and whatnot? So you can certainly have all those set up on different spools. A lot of times, if it's possible, I might have a whole rod outfit rigged. That way I have one that's probably a little bit more dedicated to streamer fishing for that day, or I have one more dedicated to nymphing. And so I can really get the most out of that specific rod. But to Nik's point, a 9'5" weight, you can get that to work for a lot of different situations. So sometimes, having a different spool where, hey, we're on the water and we were nymphing and it seemed to be going good, and suddenly we got all this rain and now it kind of got dirty, and you switch the spool over and you start streamer fishing, and voila, you start poking some fish that way.
That's right.
So, let's run through a couple of these other questions. We got one from Spencer Smith that I thought was entertaining. Are we matching? Yes, we do have similar flannels on.
Similar, but not
identical.
No.
So thank you for that one. I appreciate it a bunch.
But we can tell you where to get them.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. We kind of talked about some streamer recommendations already. That was another one. Tactics. What's the difference between a popper action versus stripping? I would say, I guess, if you want to respond to that one and kind of define the popper action a little bit more, but when Nik was referencing stripping the fly, is basically, pulling that line through basically your finger and that rod blank to really move that fly, kind of pick up the speed and get that minnow or that bug, whatever, moving around quite a bit. So picking up the speed, it doesn't always have to be fast. Sometimes slowing it down. A lot of times if we're fishing together, we'll be in different locations and I'm moving the fly a lot slower, he's moving faster, and you find out, hey, Nik's caught 6 trout doing it this way. Maybe I should switch it up. And that's usually how it tends to work out. So we'll leave a minute. If anyone else has any other questions to kind of throw in there, we can respond to those, but we're at 8:59, so we're kind of getting on time. The one thing that I do want to kind of talk about briefly, is a lot of the other events that we have going on, a lot of the other Orvis live ones. So we'll probably end up throwing up a link in there. But next Thursday, Tom Rosenbauer is going to be doing an Orvis live presentation strictly on dry fly fishing in the fall. So Nik and I, kind of touched the surface on that. If that's something that you want to dive into more, Tom is the dry fly king, and he will definitely drop some knowledge in that one. So tune in. The following week, he is going to be talking about full nymphing, and he is a great tinker with adjusting depths and changing the indicators and kind of get you help dialed in on reading trout water, getting the flies where they need to be doing that. And then at the end of the week, Sean Combs is going to be presenting on fall streamer fishing. So if you have more questions on kind of that movement, what flies to choose for different regions, I know Sean has fished absolutely everywhere, just like Tom. So I'm sure he has a lot of answers for some of those specifics for sure. And then another great thing, we have a bunch of Orvis Days events going on at all of our local Orvis retail stores, October 15th and 16th. So what we got, most of them have free beverages, food, local seminars. So if you're interested in, hey, I want to go learn how to streamer fish my local area, great. We have people in place, whether that's other fishing managers, or we have a lot of endorsed guides. They're people who are out on the water fishing constantly. They will provide a ton of knowledge. I know we have a couple stores doing some stuff on upland hunting or dog training as well. I think a link is, it just dropped in there. So you can click on that, find your local location or any of those Orvis live events. So we highly encourage you to tune in or join in some of the stores for those. They should be awesome. So got anything else for us, Nik?
No, I think, it's a great time tonight. And I hope that we were able to share some great knowledge and definitely, reach out to your store or definitely give us a call at, our store in Grand Rapids.
Yep. And a great way, just at Orvis Grand Rapids, if you have other questions, just shoot us a message in that. I'd love to respond. I'll probably be hanging on that for a while now and just responding throughout the night and hopefully tomorrow as well. So
you should get some sleep tonight, though.
I will sleep because I'm waking up early to go fish. I got super excited talking about streamer fishing. So I will be doing that before work tomorrow. So
probably going to be a good day tomorrow.
Yep. George had one quick question. Where can we subscribe to know when all the new talks will be? Are these every Thursday? Yep. So that link that just got added right above that, the Orvis.com/Orvis Days, that link will bring you right to the homepage of all the different live talks throughout the month, as well as all the stores that will be participating with in-store seminars as well. So I'll direct you there for sure. There's also a link in our Instagram bio if you want to check it out there also. So yeah. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Had a great time. Hope you had a blast, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.